Good evening. I am now calling the meeting of the Lawrence Alliance for Education to order. The time is 6:09. Before we jump in, I would just like to remind everyone that while we're all having the meeting here in person, we also have two board members participating via remote Zoom access. As such, I'll be taking roll call votes for all votes tonight. So before we go into public comment, I'd like if we could please stand and pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. And as a reminder, we are also live streaming this meeting currently on Facebook Live, and it will also be recorded and posted on the district's website. So at this point, we will call, we have two people for in-person public comment. I do want to reiterate that over the course of the last week, after last meeting, we have received many, into the hundreds of letters that board members have read, and those letters will also be entered formally into the minutes for this meeting. So just want to acknowledge that. But we also have two people for public comments. So the first one, and before I get to recognize her anyway as president of the LTU, Kim Berry.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez, Mayor Rivera, and members of the Lawrence Alliance for Education Board. As you discuss a plan for the resumption of learning this fall, the members of the Lawrence Teachers Union stand with other educators in the Merrimack Valley and across the state in calling for a gradual, phased-in reopening tied to public health and safety benchmarks. While educators would like nothing more than to be back in the classroom with our students, the ongoing level of COVID-19 transmission in Lawrence clearly requires an all-remote start to school this fall. As COVID-19 cases have risen across the state over the past few weeks, Lawrence remains one of the top 10 communities with the highest rate of positive cases. While new guidelines released yesterday by the Baker administration list Lawrence as a moderate risk community, Lawrence has recorded a 7.9 COVID-19 cases per 100,000 people over the last 2 weeks, while the threshold for being designated a high-risk community is 8 daily cases per 100,000. We have the 5th highest daily case rate in the state over the last 2 weeks. We should not put students, their families, and educators at risk of dying because of a decimal point difference. It's abundantly clear that this deadly virus is still spreading in our community and would surely enter our schools if they open in person. Our top priority needs to be protecting students, educators, and our students' family members, many of whom are elderly or otherwise especially vulnerable to COVID-19. As educators, we cannot allow ourselves to be complicit in rushing educators or students back into an unsafe building that will inevitably result in educators, students, or their families becoming ill and dying. We've outlined in a series of health and safety criteria that the state and the Lawrence Public Schools must meet before it is safe for students and educators to return to in-person classrooms. Community transmission of COVID-19 is under control in the region. There's a public health infrastructure to support effective disease testing, surveillance, tracing, and isolation in schools. All staff who are at high risk have access to remote work assignments. The district and school have funded safeguards and implemented protocols, including essential components like 6-foot physical distancing, face coverings provided by schools for all students and staff from kindergarten up, adequate personal protective equipment provided to staff, access to hand washing facilities with a consistent 100-degree Fahrenheit water and soap, resources and staffing to clean and sanitize facilities, necessary updates to ventilation and building systems to ensure safe levels of airflow, adequate space for nurses to isolate potentially infected students, as well as paid sick time to ensure that all those who members do not bring COVID into school. Union members and leaders, families, and community partners are included in our reopening process. It's clear that more work needs to be done. We'd like those criteria to be met to make our schools safe. We urge that you focus on equitable and successful, safe remote start to this school year, this fall, while continuing to do the work that needs to be done to prepare for a safe return to the classroom when the virus is under control. Thank you.
Thank you. The second speaker we have is Jackie Marmol.
Good evening to all. Jackie Marmol. I served as PTO president of the Oliver Partnership in the App Academy Oliver for several years. As a parent and resident of the city of Lawrence, I feel schools should all be remote until it is completely safe for all our students, staff, and educators. Praying and fingers crossed that this will be the ultimate decision by our superintendent, mayor, and above. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. At this time, we are going to go to the superintendent's report, but just before we do, as has been typical in many of our meetings recently, we'll turn it over to the mayor to provide an update from the city side in terms of any health-related or other information for the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report that we had out for last night's numbers, we collect them at 6:30 every night. We have 3,874 residents confirmed for positive. 134 residents have died of this virus to date. We continue to be third in the per capita across the Commonwealth. And then some of the statewide indicators have been changed. They changed yesterday. The governor came out with them. And yesterday's numbers, where we were at the number that's most important for this body, we were at 7.86 per 100,000 people, which pushed us into the yellow category. I've been in communication with the state all day trying to get the number they come out every Wednesday. So there was going to be a new number coming out today, and it should be posted sometime between 6 o'clock and 8. They told us no sooner than 6, but it should be up already. If it's not, it'll be shortly coming out. And it's going to show that we're 8.51, which pushes us from a yellow community into a red community. And I think that there are standards that DESE has for communities in the red communities, yellow communities, and green communities for us to follow. I think that's all I have for now.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, I'll turn it over to the superintendent for her report.
Thank you. So last week we had a robust conversation about the two models under the one plan. Today we come back to you with a detailed remote learning plan. So we'd like to share that with you. So first, as I shared with you last week, we conducted listening forums in the past few days. Here is the number of stakeholders and their responses to the question, if we had to open up, what reopening plan would you like to see on September the 16th? And as you can see, the remote is in the blue, the hybrid is in the red. I'd like to add that the last group that I met with just earlier this evening was the middle school families. They were at 32% with the hybrid and the 68% remote. So here is that continuum that we spoke about last week. It's that return without the restrictions, the in-person, the hybrid learning, and of course the remote learning, which is what we're going to get into next. And this metric, as our mayor just shared with us, it changes. Today is a different number. And so maybe the first slide is important for everyone to see. Yeah, we'll keep it in slide 1, and I'll just add the other additional. Thank you so much. And so again, these are the different stakeholders listening forums, and in the blue you see their desire to return remotely, and in the red their desire to return in the hybrid model. And then as I added for our middle school families, they are 32% of them voted in the hybrid and 68 voted in the remote. Thank you. And this again is just the continuum of what the possibilities are, and today we're going to be talking about remote learning. This next slide, as I had mentioned, is the metrics that the state has given us, and our mayor just updated us on the most recent data. So here we talk about the option for all of our families to be included in the remote learning, regardless of the model that we choose. And then we also want to remind that we have a deadline, but of course this is all based on the vote this evening. You should know that to date we had shared this with families, and about 603 families have applied for the full remote learning. Okay, so here are some considerations for remote learning. So DESE recommends that our high needs group attend in person, even if we choose the remote model. And those students include our students with disabilities, our English learners, and of course our students with more specific needs, additional services that they need. So students whose parents and caregivers report that they do not have access to reliable internet or suitable learning space at home are also invited into this model of in-person. And of course, our students who are homeless or living in foster care. We've also added our early and youngest learners. Those are our preschoolers and our kindergartens. And overall, approximately 20% of our students in Lawrence are in this category. So we had the conversations and great questions about devices and connectivity. As I had mentioned last week, our mayor generously replaced all of the units. He replaced we gave out 10,000 units and he replaced 14,000. So that puts us in a very good position to be able to ensure that each student has a device in the fall. Attendance is something that we're going to be paying close attention in the remote model, which means that we're going to be clear about the expectations with our students and our families and our teachers about what attendance guidelines look like for remote learning. So while the lessons will be both synchronous and asynchronous, and we gave you a little bit of an example of what that means. So synchronous is when the teacher's right in front of you on the screen. Asynchronous, as an example, I've delivered my lesson. I send you off to do part of that lesson, and that's your asynchronous part of the lesson. So again, attendance is taken in each period depending on the grade level, and the assigned schedule, or the drafted schedule, I should say, is between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. daily. For families of young students that need to assign to a family member or caretaker to support their students, we're going to ensure. Sorry, that was an add-on on that last slide. And then I can't see the other part here for gradings. Again, will also be a very clear expectations of what grades will look like in the fall for all of our learners. Thank you, Dave. So here you have an example of a schedule. So this is the district-wide student hours. Thank you. These are the young learners. You can see what that looks like. And then you have 1 through 8, and then you have our high schoolers. And here's the proposal for the teacher hours. Pretty similar across the district for all levels. See, this is an example schedule in the remote learning model for grades 1 through 8. This allows for the continuity and equity across the district, and also helps our families understand, what is my student doing at 10 in the morning? What are we expecting to? Today we had great feedback, and we will continue to incorporate this and refine our thinking. One of the families asked me today, if I only have a short window between lunch and the next class, how does my student walk to get their meal at the school and then come back with enough time? Excellent feedback. We'll incorporate that as well. This is an example for our high needs students, and as I mentioned, this is for 20% of our students. And Dave, I wonder if we can push the bar out down to the bottom, if that's possible. Yeah, it's a little tricky. Okay. So this is for those high needs students that required that in-person learning. Here's an example of what that schedule might look like. Again, in this model, I'll add that the Wednesdays would be remote as well. Here's an example of the student schedule for the high schoolers in the remote learning model. Yeah, I know, it's hard where to put the bar. Thank you. And here are additional resources, and this is expanded instructional resources for the full remote and the hybrid as well. And so this is the investment from the CARES Act, and here is the additional resources that we are proposing. And what you see on the graphics, like ST Math and Language Live, these are all applications and blended learning platforms, both in print and digital, that our teachers have been using. This is not new to our students and our teachers, and we would just expand that across the district. Okay, so this is an example of the professional learning schedule for our teachers. You had a lot of great questions about that last week. In addition, we're going to be also offering workshops for our families. We had a lot of questions about that as well during these listening forums, but this is an example of the reopening professional development for our teachers. It is a combination of school-based and then district-based learning. And then also your request to sort of give you a breakdown of both the models and see what the expected cost may be. As you can see, the big difference here is in the transportation. We may also need additional staff. And then, of course, the custodial overtime, because it would require quite a bit of disinfecting and cleaning in betweens for our custodial staff. So we'd love to hear your additional questions, thoughts, comments.
Great, thank you. And just in terms of process, similar to last meeting, what I'd like to do is have board members, and we'll start with reverse alphabetical order this time, but what I'd like to do is, again, go through one round of questions for the superintendent, and if need be, we'll do another round. And then after that, I think if we're at a point where someone's ready to submit a motion for consideration, then I think we can do that. But for now, we're just going to go, and I'll start with Julia with questions.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Ventura, for that. I really don't have any questions. We're here tonight to vote on the whatever plan we choose to go with, and I have serious concerns about the options that we have, basically because of the status that the city is in, and I think none of us wants to put in jeopardy the health of our children, their parents, the teachers, and everybody involved in this. So at this point, my full consideration would be to go with the remote learning until we have further information or better, or we're better situated as far as that vaccine or anything like that in the near future. Hopefully that will be the case. And I also want to take this time to thank all the teachers and all of the parents and everybody, students and everybody that took their time to reach out to us and let us know their concerns. And those concerns are very serious to us as well, or to me anyways, because I'm very much aware. It is a little bit concerning the number of special ed students that we have, or the special needs, because we understand that they will be probably in the worst situation, placed in the worst situation, since some of them probably will have an issue with the remote learning from home. But hopefully we might be able to come up with something that we can offer them to assist them and their parents and to continue on with their education. So that is my position at this time, and I will free it up for somebody else. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mayor Rivera?
Yes, I have a couple questions about the remote, the thoroughness of remote. Can we just, I don't know if we can go back to some of those slides. I gotta tell you, I just feel like I'm suspect about the thoroughness of remote learning. I worry about the kids in these settings where they're not getting all the things they need, and then brings the question, well, are you going to put them in harm's way by bringing them to the schools? I think that there's a lot of conversation out there, but the science has been very clear about some of these things. Unfortunate for us, I think being a red community doesn't give us many options. But considering that we're painted into this corner, where we have to do remote according to DESE standards, I just want to make sure that a couple things happen. And that is that we do a weekly public dashboard of every kid who has attended or not attended school. That has to be critical. Whatever it is, bad or worse, indifferent. Let's know how many kids are logging in and signing up. Because then we'll know how many kids are missing education. I think there's got to be a team of people that does the wellness checks on some of these kids who don't show up, who don't log on, who might be in harm's way. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about how is this the role of education. I didn't decide that. That's just where we are as a society. You know, I think people above my pay grade can change that. We've done our best to make things better here in the city, but wellness checks for kids who don't go to class online. I think you have to do fun, interactive, thoughtful videos in English and in Spanish, and in whatever other languages we need to have, to show parents how to log in and how to log their kids onto attendance. So all those myriad of applications that are going to be used. I know it's easy to say, well, it's a parent's responsibility, but you know, I just think it's going to be hard for parents who already struggle with their own educational attainment to then show their kids or get their kids logged in and doing these things. Yeah, and I know people are logged into Snapchat and Facebook, all that thing. I think this is totally different. And I'm hoping that we'll have fun, interactive videos that really do teach people how to log in and get their kids in front of the screen for class. You know, I just, I worry a lot because we see the kids that we don't see are the ones that are I think, going to be hurt the most for not having an interaction with an adult outside of their household. But the public health number is what the public health number is, and we have to stick by it. Which means that if you're in this community, you got to wear a mask, you got to social distance, and you know, now becoming a red community, we're going to go back and figure out whether or not we should shut down in-store restaurant eating, things of that nature, just to see if we can stop the spread. But being a red community does change everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Pat Mariano?
Yes, thank you, Ventura. Superintendent, I'm thrilled that you presented the remote learning model tonight. Because of this model and felt it was the proper way to go. I just have a couple of questions about it. I hope that there's some kind of a plan where parents do kind of, take off on what the mayor said. We need to meet with parents one-on-one and make sure that parents have a full understanding about the grading, the participation rate, and the high expectations that a district that we're going to have for these kids. I didn't see in the teacher schedule any grade level planning built into that schedule. I think that's important that teachers have the opportunity to meet with their grade level teams to plan robust lessons. I'm still in favor of teachers teaching remotely from their classrooms because I believe that's the only way school is going to be real for our kids. They need to see an actual classroom, and teachers need to have everything at their fingertips. And also have the support of their grade level teams and their administrative staff in the building. I believe that we need to guarantee our staff that the buildings will be sanitized and clean when they leave at the end of the day in preparation for them the next day. I really believe that this is the right way to go and the safest way for our whole Lawrence Public School community. So I thank you for that presentation tonight. And as you can understand, I am fully in favor of remote learning with the classroom teachers teaching remotely from their classrooms. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Noemi?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I want to echo what others have been saying, especially I want to thank all the parents and students and families that send us their emails with their concerns, with questions, ideas. That's something that I also read, most of them, and many of the concerns are also the concerns that we all have. And I just want everybody to know that we'll hear the committee. We have been reading these letters. Based on what is happening right now, I feel the same way. I think that the best way to go right now is the with the remote learning. And even then, I do have some questions related to that. And one of them, it has to do with a slide that was presented last week, where they were talking about that we still have some students that do not have reliable internet. We still have some students that do not have computers. And if we're going to be fully remote, we have to make sure that we reach out to those kids and they will have that, the internet and also the computer. The other question so that's, I guess, is a comment. The question that I have is how parents or the kids are going to access the daily breakfast and lunches if they don't have transportation. Would they be setting up a place where they can have a pickup place? How has been doing now, and how are they planning to do it in the fall?
Yeah, thank you. I can share with you that we successfully delivered thousands of meals, and Carol might even have that number with her during the emergency closure and throughout this summer, and we will continue to do that. We will continue to offer both breakfast and lunch for all of our families. And so, just as a reminder, we chose very strategic schools in the city that were close enough to all of our families, including additional sites, so that families could walk or drive or whatever the mode of transportation to pick up their breakfast and lunch.
Okay, thank you. And the other question is, based on what we're seeing right now, the likely scenario is that we'll be going remote. What efforts will be made to further engage families? And this is something that even before COVID-19, we were talking about what are the strategies that we're using to engage families. Well, now we are at a different level, different situation. So is part of this plan include aspects related to further engagement with families and kids? Going back to what the mayor was saying, what about the kids that we never hear about? Are there processes that will allow the school district to follow up to figure out what is going on with the students?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be designing not just, as I had mentioned earlier, professional development opportunity for our staff, but also for our families. And you should know that in my conversations with families across the district this week, they all are very eager to participate in those workshops and los talleres for both understanding what are the specifics of attendance, what does it mean for grading, what are the skills that the kids are going to be learning, what about the curriculum and the standards, and also this issue of technology, as we've discussed before. How do you log on to Zoom? How do I know what to expect in a Zoom lesson or the other platforms that we've been using? And how do I know how my student is doing along the way? So all of those things we're going to be discussing. And we're going to do that before school starts and throughout the year.
Okay, and then my last question. This one is more for the kids. Having two children myself in the school district, not in yours in Haverhill, but also, working with the early college kids in Lawrence. And some of the expectations that students had, after once that we get into the pandemic, is that attending to class or doing some of the work was more like, quote unquote, bonus points, or it didn't really count, which makes me wonder if perhaps the participation of the students was not as robust because they already have that expectation. And this, now that we were moving into most likely going remote starting in the fall, that expectation has to change if it still persists. Have you guys considered orientation for the kids too, so then they will understand what does it mean to be in class, participate, attendance, and so forth?
You're right. Under the emergency closure in the spring, we adopted the pass-fail grading system. And as a reminder, we also adopted not to retain students. We agreed that this closure was not only traumatic, but quite difficult for both staff, families, and students. And so we did not retain students, and we also adopted the pass-fail. Moving forward, as I had mentioned earlier, that's going to change. We will have very clear expectations about gradings, homework, assignment, and project-based learning. So all of that will be part of not just the orientation, but the weekly and daily conversations that we have with our kids. It's going to be real school, and real school to the extent that we do it remotely, but still meaning that there will be very clear expectations about what that means.
Okay, and the last thing, and this is more for all the parents, staff, and teachers that send us emails. Please know that the decision that we'll make tonight is something that we will need, the school district will need the help of everybody to ensure that the kids have access to the material that they need to access, and they can complete the work, because this is something that is very hard, and it's going to take the effort of the whole city if we want our kids to succeed. Thanks.
Thank you, Noemi. Jess?
Okay. I guess, first of all, like many others here, I do want to thank everybody who wrote in or had a conversation with me or shared their thoughts or perspectives, wrote to all of us on the board, because it was very helpful, if a bit overwhelming sometimes, to hear all of that feedback and to get all of the different perspectives. And I do have to say that following all of the conversations that I've had and the stuff that I've read, I'm coming down on the side of a remote start to the year, but I do want to say that I'm doing this with a reluctant heart, because I feel very strongly that remote learning is not as effective as in-person learning, and I'm just, like, deeply saddened and concerned about what I perceive as the potential for a lot of loss of progress for our community. But I understand that the safety concerns right now are paramount, and we just don't have enough answers, or I think enough resources, on the facilities side, on the sort of procedures side, in terms of what we do if somebody or some groups of people do start to get sick. And so I do think we have to start remote. And one of the other reasons, I guess, why I'm going to support that is because I do have the sense that starting off with the hybrid model in some ways is going to spread our resources too thin, because we're going to be trying to do remote learning well, because a lot of parents are going to opt into that. I think the majority of parents are, probably definitely based on conversations I've had. And we're going to be spreading teachers thin, trying to do a hybrid model, which will bring its own stresses and challenges in person, plus mastering the remote stuff. So I guess I would rather, if we're going to do this, I guess I feel like we need to double down and do the remote learning really well, which means really investing in supporting our teachers to have the tools that they need, to be able to effectively engage students, and as several of my fellow board members have said, investing the resources in outreaching to families and engaging families. I think that even if we solve, as I think we're working hard to do, the questions around technology and access, we are still going to have families in which, a parent might be working, there might be multiple children in the household, it's going to be an older child taking care of younger ones, trying to engage them in their learning while they're also doing their own learning. That's going to be a very difficult situation for any of the children to progress within. We're placing a huge burden on parents of special needs students and English learners. And I know that many of those parents are deeply torn because they feel that the at-home and remote stuff has not been effective for their child, but they're also deeply concerned about safety. So I do think we are going to have to start remote, but I agree with the mayor that I need us to have some kind of extremely regular accountability around how attendance is going, how engagement is going, what some of the challenges are, how teachers are feeling about the professional development and support that they're getting, if there are adequate resources for that, if there's other things that need to be brought in to help teachers create good and engaging lesson plans. And I think, we have to find some way of figuring out how effective, some way, in my mind, hopefully that's not MCAS, but that is some way of figuring out how effective this remote learning model has been in getting our kids to actually learn. I also, I guess I have some questions. I just want to dig a little bit into the food question. I think this is a big issue for our families, and I know I just want to make sure that we're clear. When we say delivering food to families, it's not that we're bringing food to families' homes.
That's correct.
Right? So I do think that we're going to need to devote some staffing resources to figuring out how to help families regularly access the food that they are going to need and that many of them rely on during the school year. Most of our kids are getting breakfast and lunch at school, so that's, roughly 2/3 of their calorie intake for the day. So I think we're going to need to, I would like to understand a little bit more about our staffing and support plan for engagement at all levels of students and of families, and kind of problem solving when we have families at home that that are, for various very valid reasons, are having trouble engaging. And then I guess the other thing that I would say is, as we start to think about phasing back in, I do think we absolutely need to prioritize the groups that are laid out in this, and so if there are ways that we can use the facilities we have to safely get our special needs students and our English learners and our youngest kids back in, and figure out how to do that safely and solve the ongoing facilities questions around ventilation and windows and hot water and all of those things that I know have come up over and over again. We need to think about how, in what order people are coming back and how we're doing that. So I guess that's it. It's not really questions. It's just, I feel that I need to be honest about my ambivalence about this, but also, that we've really heard loud and clear the overriding concerns around safety and health for the community, and that has to take precedence.
Thank you. I have a few questions as well. And first of all, I just want to echo the just sincere thanks to all of the feedback we received in the form of letters, in the form of the different stakeholders who attended the meetings with the district. I had several conversations directly with parents. And I have to say, just candidly, that in my 25-ish years in education, this has easily been the hardest decision I've ever had to make. I have literally not been able to sleep, And I know I say that because I know it's not just me. In the letters that I've read, I think there were a lot of form letters that communicated, concerns maybe that captured what people felt, and that's fair. And then there were also letters that people wrote that were, paragraphs long, that were coming from just their own specific situation. And, these were from teachers, they were from parents. I had some from community members who don't have children currently in the schools, but felt like they wanted to express their point of views. And I just want those people to know that, again, we don't read those letters here, but I read them, the conversations that people were having as expressed in those letters with family members, with neighbors, just trying to figure out what is the right decision. Just know that, I personally was wrestling with that and continue to wrestle with that. And quite frankly, even after we vote tonight, we'll continue to wrestle with that. Because I think, as Jess said, I think the health indicators right now that we have access to point to a remote opening. That said, I agree with Jess that, and I agree with, quite frankly, a lot of the letters that said to me, we also know that this is not the best academic experience for most of our students. And it's hard making a decision that I strongly feel is not in the best interest of students in terms of, on the one hand, the academics, but obviously I think for the health information that we have right now, I absolutely think it's the right decision to make for students and the adults that work in our schools. So again, just reiterating, this is it's been a tremendously difficult decision, and I know I'm not the only one. Everyone here on this dais and in the audience, and again, as reflected in the letters that I read, I know it's been really, really difficult. There's been a lot of anxiety, from a lot of people. So, just wanted to start with that. I think the other thing I want to just make sure, and just factually, because the board will be voting on this plan, is that the current sort of plan that's laid out tonight is remote learning for the vast majority of our students. And just to be clear, that's the plan. However, for that 20% of students that were laid out in the slide, those high needs populations, those families will have the option of choosing an in-person model. And again, I just want to underscore that because that's what I'm understanding, and I want to make sure we're clear on what we're voting on. Those families, again, will have the choice, and as the superintendent said, that accounts for about 20% of district student enrollment. But again, part of the work is we will continue to gather from families via the survey what it is they actually choose. So we will get a more precise number, and we'll need a more precise number in order to finalize plans for that portion of students that will have access to an in-person option. Which again, for me, underscores something I said last week, and I know the district is working on it, but just the critical nature of the data around what our students are choosing. So similar to as we have registration processes for all families, like this has to be to the level that we get confirmation from every single family who is eligible in that 20% of what their preference is. So again, we cannot move forward unless we get confirmation from every single one of those families, because that will impact planning, and it'll impact obviously how we run those programs. The other thing I want to say is that the plan that we approved tonight is not static. So it's going to evolve. It's going to evolve starting probably after the meeting, tomorrow, later this week, because what we're doing is we're voting on an approach for the fall. And again, what I'm hearing is remote for the vast majority of students, About 20% have the option of choosing some in-person learning, but at the end of the day, like, it could be 90% of students or more, that end up doing the remote. So regardless, the plan that's laid out tonight is the vast majority of students are going to be remote this fall. The work now, and I think it is important to make a decision right now for a lot of different reasons, and one of them is, as someone said earlier, to make sure that the district can now focus, with the staff, with the teachers, on just firming up the plan for how we're going to actually now implement the decision that this board makes. As others have said, the work with remote learning, I too just want to underscore how critical I think it is to have weekly data that we can review about student participation, student engagement, student access. I think that's going to be critical. I would like to also underscore, I think it was Pat who said this, some sort of ideally in-person orientation for students and families, not all at once. Again, we have to think about how to do this safely and if it's outside, but again, this notion that there's a benefit, I think, for students at least having some connection to the adults that they're going to be seeing on Zoom. Maybe it's tying it to like device pickup, that hasn't happened for some students, where students, I understand families come in person to get devices. So obviously I would want to make sure we're extremely safe from a health standpoint, but to the degree possible, like having some sort of, and I think Pat may have framed it as a sort of one-on-one meeting, but bottom line is that just that connection as much as possible with the adults that are going to be working with students, I think will be really important. Another thing I'd like to propose, and again, a lot of these things I'm also proposing, it's not just for the district, but for this board. I'm going to charge us with work is, I think there are other communities that when we look at the health data and we look at the kind of plans that they're putting forward, places like Chelsea, Everett, Lynn, that I think we should really make sure that we're talking with and collaborating to the degree possible to understand the practices that they're implementing, share what we're doing, and to the degree possible, just continue to learn. I think that right now, the health metrics obviously are different in every community, but given that the Department of Public Health guidelines that are going to come out, sort of that red category, we're going to see that there are very few districts in there, or cities rather, and we're one of them. But it behooves us to connect with some of those places, because as I've been reading their plans, they're all publicly available, and that's the other thing, I've been reading a lot of different plans online because they're publicly available, and some of those plans, for places like Chelsea and Everett and Lynn, talk about remote learning as a primary mode of instruction, but then they also talk about, how they're going to provide also instruction for some of their most vulnerable students. So that seems to be consistent. And then they're also talking about how they're going to try to provide access for students who still, have issues with things like connectivity in their home and things like that. So I'm just going to say, again, if as we're continuing to flesh out our plan, if we can look at what some of other, districts are doing just for, because I think there's an opportunity for collaboration and sharing of best practice. Up to this point of weekly data, I think the mayor said weekly data. I don't want to make that up, but I agree that it has to be weekly data around engagement, participation, and I also think it's important to make sure that we're looking at these important health metrics and benchmarks that come out, and again, there's this weekly report that's critical that talks about positivity rates and case loads over the last 14 days. I think it's critical for this board to be meeting weekly moving forward to make sure that we're looking at that information every single week, because again, we're going to be approving a plan today, but we need to have a vision for what it's going to look like for our children to come back to school in person, and that may happen in 3 months, 6 months, a year, I'm not sure, but it's going to happen at some point. And so we need to be thinking long-term in terms of what is our plan? Will it be phased in? And if so, what are the health benchmarks and other benchmarks that we need to be monitoring to give us confidence that we can move to the next phase in our reopening plan? So I'm going to ask that this board, starting next week, meet weekly to review the district's progress towards implementation of the reopening plan, and then also, again, to continue to monitor important health benchmarks, and then continue to the degree possible, as the district is really focusing on reopening. I think this board can also play a role, again, in helping us flesh out the plan sort of further downstream.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, sorry?
I don't know if you were ready for a motion.
I'm not ready yet, if
Okay.
you don't mind. Sorry, just give me a second. I get the final thing I'll say is, and I just want to confirm, Superintendent, that there was a slide on the budget earlier, and we don't have to go back to it, but if I understand it, there was, maybe like a $3-ish million difference between the hybrid model that was proposed versus the remote learning model.
That's correct.
Is that correct? So that's a $3-ish million savings, we could say, implementing a remote learning. Okay, there it is, and I need to put my glasses on. And
Sure, the differential is between the buses and the custodial, as you can see there, and additional staff. That's the differential.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'm coming back to something Jess said earlier, that if the way I'm reading this is that we're saving some money, potentially going into the remote versus hybrid. Is that a right way of looking at it?
Right, so the savings again would be in the bus,
Okay,
and then additional staffing if we were to go in the hybrid, and then the overtime for the custodial staff.
perfect. And so again, just reiterating something Jess said, is that if we can then think about how we reinvest funding to do things like beef up engagement, with families. And again, another district, and hopefully after today, you will now be able to just focus squarely on one plan, so, but again, can we get creative about how we're engaging, who's checking in, like what that looks like? Can we tap, young people, high school students or others to, virtually maybe, but still establish connections or work, in a way that students feel like there's someone that they are, checking in with. And so, again, I just throwing ideas out, but the bottom line is like this notion of reinvesting the savings to those areas that we know will be challenging: engagement, additional support, things like that. So, just really look forward to continuing that further. So, okay, so we went through this one round. Let me, before I entertain a motion, I'd like to just quickly go through one more time and see if there are any other additional questions or comments. So I'll start back with
Ventura, before you
Yep.
do that, this is not a comment, it's just, I'm getting some messages that the sound quality for people who are listening to the live stream is not good, that it's very low. So I don't know if there's anything that we can do to adjust that or make that better, or if we're all,
Is that on Zoom or is it on Facebook?
they're not specifying, they're just saying the sound is not good, that it's coming through very low. Oh, we addressed it earlier, okay, all right. All right, okay, thanks, Chris. Sorry, go ahead, yeah.
So, Julio?
Yeah, I just have a couple of
And I'm sorry,
comments.
Julio, can I just, I've been refreshing the Department of Public Health website for the last hour, for whatever hours, and it finally has the report dated August 12th, and just confirming what the mayor already reported, that Lawrence is red 8.5 incidence rate per 100,000. So it's finally publicly available. Sorry, Julio.
Oh, no, that was important.
It's always better, I'm getting the same things about the things, better if you talk right into the microphone for people that are streaming.
I just have a couple of comments. I think all of the discussions that we've had today are excellent. We all have taken time to really look at this plan and think about the consequences which we really don't know what the consequences are going to be. And we will find out. We will definitely find out, probably later than sooner, because we need to get this, start working on it. I think that one of the biggest things today, by us voting on this, on our decision today, it's only going to give the staff and the district more time to be able to work on developing a better plan for remote teaching and remote learning for our students. So I'm happy that we're now at this stage. And I'm looking at, we have roughly, 15,000 student population in the city of Lawrence. And I'm looking at the slide where we have 86% of our teachers that are not in favor of in-person education because of the same issues that we have discussed. Out of that, we have 20% of our high-needs students, which represents about 3,000 students, that we feel, or something that Ventura just brought up in terms of the two plans that he thinks we should be voting on. But we only have 14% of the teaching staff that is willing at this point, because those numbers could still change, decide that they really don't want to come in person to teach, which represents less than the 3,000 students, represents less than the 14%, more than the 14% of the teaching staff that is willing to come in to teach. So how, if we were to vote on this, which is what was presented now, how are we going to make sure that the teaching staff will be readily available to teach those students that need this type of assistance? And we all know that this is a big concern, because we haven't really developed any type of teaching mechanism for these students that are in this situation where the parents probably might be lacking the expertise to help them out. So maybe we need to look at that, rather than us taking a vote tonight and saying that this is going to be in place for the school year, at least for the beginning of the school year. I feel more comfortable at this point saying voting 100% for remote learning, at least until the end of the year, for everybody, even though we know that we have a situation with this percentage of students that need more hand-holding, if at all. So that is my statement regarding those numbers.
Thank you. Mayor Rivera?
Yeah, so I just looked up the enrollment on DESE website, and it's about 13,653 students, and we're probably closer to 14 or 14.5, let's call it. But DESE's thing about a city or town that's red is remote with consideration for these groups. So if we follow DESE's things, is that we have to have consideration for these groups. I think part of this is knowing that we have to provide some services for these high needs people. But like the chair said, half of the students with IEP, that maybe their families say, I'm not going to send them at all. Half of the English language learners, or the first time learners, I'm not going to send them at all. So the number shrinks. But just like we were going to carve out a special place for students who wanted to learn remotely, I think it is beholden upon us to carve out a special place for students and families who have to avail themselves of some type of service, some baseline service. And I think that because it's going to be a smaller group, I know the superintendent's slide says 20%. Who knows what that number in the end will actually be, but more importantly, we at least have 20% of facilities that can manage that group of people. 100% of our facilities wouldn't have been able to handle it, hence where you have to have different groups. But this isn't even just about families who don't have educational capacity or skills. This is about families who have kids who are in need of services. And I would just make sure we understand that they have been without services. And I remember when we missed one or two things on an IEP, people would lose their minds about the IEP. So I want to just be clear, we're not talking about students with low service needs. We're talking about, I think it specifically says high need group. I don't think it's going to be, the target group is 20%. I think in the end, in execution, it will be less than that. But even if we hit 20%, there is definitely 20% of facilities that can manage that, and with the effort of a full district, not trying to teach 13 or 14,000 students, trying to teach a smaller group of students, I think that we could get that done safely in order to meet those educational needs. Again, I came here tonight prepared to do hybrid, so I understand that as a red community, we don't have that option. And so that group of kids, or the kids we know about, have problems. So it will be, for all intents and purposes, for most kids, remote. And even the kids with high needs, because even some of the parents don't know that the kids with high needs, we're going to keep those kids at home. So the number keeps shrinking. And I think we have enough hands on deck to manage that battle.
May I ask a question or
Sure.
follow up on what Dan just said from the superintendent? What do we have in place to know that we have the teaching staff readily available to teach those children that are willing to come in person to provide those services? That's number one. And number two, if these children come in for services, because we all understand that they need it, and they get sick, what do we have? Have we contemplated any measures to be put in place for those two situations, should they happen?
Sure, so we're going to be working very closely with our LTU partners and leadership to sort of troubleshoot this question of the staffing for our high needs population. And then we do have very clear protocols and that tell us what to do in the case of an infection. But more importantly, we do also have very clear protocols of what to do to prevent and minimize the risk of infection. So I think we're going to be very proactive first, and then follow protocols if and when we are positive with an infection.
What happens, and this probably will be my final question, but what happens, I mean, we understand right now that employees have the right to refuse, to some extent, to come into work if they feel that their health is in jeopardy. Be it I don't know about the school system, but I know in the private sector that is the case. If an employee decides that they don't want to come in because they feel that they're not they don't feel good about coming back, the private sector cannot force them to come back into work. So what will happen in a case like this in the school system if a number of teachers refuses to come in to teach because of health issues or concerns?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as the numbers revealed earlier when we polled the staff that was with us early in the forum, you do have a small percentage of staff members who said they would be willing to do hybrid. We don't know who those people are, and of course, again, we have to work very closely with our LTU partner to be able to say, here are the high needs. And again, as the mayor mentioned, at that 20% might be much, much, much smaller. I did speak to a few families who have students that need additional service, in particular, families who have students in the sub-separate. So these are one of the groups of students who need incredible amount of structure. One mom said to me that, her student has regressed quite a bit, that he needs so much structure in order to be successful, that remote learning simply is not an option. That of course she's worried about his health and safety, and she's worried about his teacher's health and safety. But she just simply understands that would not work for her student. So, right, those will be many cases that we troubleshoot with teachers and our partners and decide how do we do this in a safe way that people feel comfortable, and at the same time we do the delivery that our students so much need.
That's still, I have a tough time on this right now, on the plan the way it is, because I came in fully prepared to vote just for a totally remote plan rather than the hybrid or any type of plan, and not losing sight of the needs of those students. And I'm just concerned that if we vote tonight, whether we might be placing additional burden on the school district by doing that. I totally understand your explanation and the needs of those students that are at home, but I'm also concerned for their safety as well as the safety of the people that are going to be working with them. Thank you.
Great. Pat?
Yes, is Chris Merlino in the room?
Yes, he is.
Yes.
I just would like Chris to reiterate what is happening right now for the buildings as far as how safe does he feel the buildings would be for just teachers to come back in their own classrooms? How safe are the buildings?
Good evening. Good evening. The answer to that question, Pat, there's 20 schools with the ventilation concerns. 14 of our schools do not have proper ventilation. When I say proper ventilation, it's windows. That's what we'll be using to use the ventilation. It's windows. The other 6 schools have HVAC proper ventilation. The city is working diligently on repairing as much units as fast as possible. So that is the answer to that question.
Do you feel, Chris, that that we would be ready to have the staff come back, just the staff, for the opening of school, if all things work out?
Pat, can I just clarify, do you mean so that they could do as you suggested and teach
Chris
from their
explained-
classroom?
Chris explained that, the DPW staff is working diligently to get these buildings up to speed. Does he feel that we're, on target to have the buildings ready for the opening of school?
But
Does that make sense?
yes, but I'm asking if you're asking that question because you're asking if they're ready, even though we won't have students back in most cases. You're asking that because you're following up on your suggestion that teachers teach from the classrooms. Is that correct?
Right. I want to just make sure that, yes, if we classrooms, will the buildings be ready and safe for them to come back to do that?
I'm going to save Chris, 'cause I don't think that's a fair question for Chris.
I don't think so.
I mean, again,
No?
he can tell you about the physical plant. 14 of the schools will rely on opening windows for ventilation. Did I get that right? And the balance of them, 6,
Correct.
will have functioning HVAC systems. Whether or not he considers it safe is, he's not a safe building specialist. And I worry that we would put the burden on Chris to say today, it's good, they'll be good to come back. So I worry about that for Chris. He don't work for me, But I'm just saying that I don't think that's a fair question for Chris.
Yeah, I'll just add that we are going to be in close collaboration with DPW and make recommendations in terms of this challenge of ventilation. And we're happy to come back to you with further reports and better data about the ventilation challenge.
It wasn't my intent to put Chris on the spot. It's just to make sure we're providing, if we're going with remote learning, just make sure that we're providing our students with the closest thing to a real classroom experience. And the only way they're going to have that real experience is to have that teacher in a classroom teaching with all the materials and everything he or she needs to conduct quality lessons. That was my only intent. I apologize, Chris. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
And if I could, if I could just, and thank you, Mayor, I appreciate that. I think the plan we approved tonight, just to the point, like these are not static, like it's not done tonight. Like I think to get to this question, because I think again factually, we know 6 buildings have the full HVAC system. The other 14 rely on windows for ventilation. I think part of the work this board has to do between now and the beginning of the school year is work on implementation. So we need to get very specific on what do we mean by adequate or sort of the necessary ventilation. Again, there are measures for this. I think there's ways to assess where we're at and things that we can do to mitigate to make sure that we can get there that don't require necessarily installing HVAC systems, because we're not going to do that. But there are ways, and again, schools are doing this all over the Commonwealth, all over the country. But I think just to the point that I think that's part of the work that has to now continue between now and September 16th, right? When people actually start. So, Pat, it's not like kicking it down the line. I think it's a critical question, but I think we have to actually have a conversation based on, again, a little more specific data and like what does it actually mean to have the buildings ready. All right, Pat, any other comments or questions? Pat, any other comments or questions, Pat?
No, I'm all set. I'm all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Noemi? Noemi, do you have any other questions or comments? Noemi, any last questions or comments?
No, at this point.
Okay, thank you. Jess?
I guess the only thing is I just want to agree with your suggestion around having us meet weekly from now on. I think that under the circumstances, there's a lot still to work out even after we vote tonight. I tend to agree with the mayor's response to Julia's questions, but I do think it's important that the questions that Julia raised be addressed in terms of what's the match between the actual students that would come back in that 20% or less category and the teaching staff that we will have available to deal with them. So that is still a bit of an open question.
Great. And for my comments and questions, I think I'll pick it up right there and maybe ask, well, let me say before I ask the superintendent that question, I think we need to have weekly meetings. I think that every second for our staff is going to be necessary for them to get ready to start the school year. So I'm going to ask, and I won't schedule the meeting time right now. I will follow up with board members to do that. But I'm flagging that I want to make sure that we may have for some of those weekly check-ins, it may be via Zoom. We need to look at the time to make sure that, again, it works for the wide range of stakeholders that participate, including our staff. Just because, again, if it saves staff some driving time, and it's just, I think it's going to take every second that they have. And so I think we need to continue to meet in person, but I'm just going to propose and put on the table that some of these weekly meetings may also be remote. We may do a balance just to make sure that, and again, I can follow up with board members specifically about that. But to this question of matching and knowing now of the 20% of students that are eligible for some sort of in-person, and, how are we going to know exactly what they're, choosing? I guess I'll turn it to the superintendent and just ask, what, I know we have the survey out, but if you could just talk a little bit more what you anticipate that process and maybe a timeline for us to get that information.
Yeah, so we're all anticipating the vote this evening so that we can plan accordingly, and that includes our staffing, right? And so until we had the green light to move forward with a specific model, then it's really hard to answer the question in terms of the match. Moving forward, we're going to be surveying our staff members. We're going to be also surveying our families. So back to that original comment, that 20% may be quite reduced. And so I gave you the example of the one family member who shared with me, remote is not going to work. But I also had other family members who shared, my student's IEP, they need the following service, but I'm not willing to bring my student back. So there will be a lot of that. And until we survey both staff and families, it'll be hard for me to say to you, here's the exact match. But moving forward, I can share that with you.
Do you have a sense of timeline, just roughly?
Right away is our desire, as soon as next week.
So as soon as next week, we may have that information.
As soon as this week, we will start with surveying and designing that process to ensure that is the correct, the most up-to-date data. So we may not have it for you next week, but we will start that process next week.
Great. Yeah, I think it'll be critical over the next 2-3 weeks. I mean, obviously, the vote will allow you all to start planning, speaking, as you said, with our LTU partners. So that will just, that'll be critical. And then I think just the other thing I want to say is, part of the ongoing meetings that this board will have relate to the health metrics overall that are available from public health. I think, making sure that we have a specific metric around what we mean by ventilation. And again, I'm a layperson here. I don't know that world, but I'm being told through the guidance that exists through ASHRA associations and others that there are actual, air. I'm not even going to try to explain it, but there's a way to actually try to measure, I think what we're getting at, which is trying to dilute the air in a space such that, the space, increases just the safety. And so I think that things like masks, social distancing that have proven to also help, I guess I'm just suggesting that between now and the start of the school, I want this board to be naming and looking at those kind of metrics to decide, like we will throughout the whole year, if we're ready to implement. And again, this board reserves the right to change this plan based on that data. So I just want to be super clear, that we're not going to put, we're taking a vote tonight, and we're going to continue to look at the situation with everything to make sure that we still feel like it just makes sense for the health and safety of all of our students, our staff, all of our families to move forward. So just putting it out there because we may change our minds based on the available data that's there, and I think that's our role, and I think that's just the responsible way to do this. So, Mayor.
Yeah, and to that effect, I think people have brought up the issue of ventilation. They brought up the issue of, do you have hot water, and the doctors, I won't even try to use that word.
Scientists.
The scientists that are talking about this, those things are really specific on what you need. And I did go back and talk to the people that are helping the DESE folks out. People wrote articles about the Massachusetts Pediatrics Association. and people like that, because I wanted to say, hey, you wrote an article that says kids should go back to school. Do you still stand by it? That stuff was in June. And they said, yeah, we still stand by it. And then we talked to the people about, hey, what about spread in schools? And they said, well, the biggest problem with spread in schools is adult to adult. And so it all gets minimized if people are wearing their masks. And they're practicing social distancing and they're washing. But you got to know what's going on in your community. So we're going to talk and ask the last 150, 200 people who got the virus in our community, how'd you get it? How'd you come to buy it? So we can make sure we're focusing on those things to fight the spread in those ways. So in a school setting where folks think, well, the ventilation needs to be at a certain level. The reality is it's not ventilation and masks. It's just masks. Ventilation is clearly you don't want to have a 200-degree room where people can teach and all those things with kids in it. But in the motion I'll make, I think that there's a thing that you can do to make everybody feel good about spaces.
Great. So I will entertain a motion at this time.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to bring the district in at the start of school into remote DESI mandated remote, because we are a red community with the considerations for high needs learners. The second part of that, there's actually 3 parts to this motion. The second part of that is that we do a complete student census to every 14,000 students that we have in our school districts that answers 3 basic questions. Do you have a device? Do you have Wi-Fi? And how will you be getting food? You guys can wordsmith it out, but the answer to those questions are very critical. And then the third part of this question, this motion is to also, since we're going to be targeting 20% of the students for in-person support and needs, that we create a team review of class spaces that includes at least 1 member of the union, 1 member of facilities, and 1 member of the city administration, that we could find the top spaces to put these kids who need the support in across the district. And I do that as a form of a motion. But if you need me to read it back, I will.
Well,
Second.
I'll second that for discussion.
Second.
great. So let me just try to repeat the
Discussion?
motion, first of all.
want me
Do
to
you
repeat
want to
it?
break that into 3 motions?
No.
or-
Sure.
No, I think it sinks and swims together.
Okay.
So I can start again if you want.
Let me restate the motion as far as I understand it. So there's a motion with 3 parts. The first is that we approve a plan for remote learning for the district, which includes the consideration for the up to 20% special needs population. That's one. The second is that we do a census of all families to determine if they have a device, Wi-Fi, and how are you getting food. And the third is to create a committee, right, a review team review of all classroom spaces that includes multiple stakeholders. I heard teachers. I didn't catch all the list of stakeholders.
I can do it.
Thank you.
It's a person from facilities, a union representative, and an administration representative. I don't mean like a city administration. I meant the superintendent's staff.
Can I
To
ask
review
them-
specifically those spaces, we're going to try to put the 20% needs students in.
I don't have a problem with the first 2 parts of the motion, but I think that last part maybe should be a separate motion. Just for clarification purposes, I
Yeah.
understand the motion fully, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying that it might be simpler to separate those 2.
Well, I want you to say yes to the first 2, so that's why I added the third one.
I mean, in all candor, again, like I actually would prefer.
I'm just being serious. Like, I think the third one will pass with no problem. But
Yeah.
for me, the reason why you do that is so you can get the support for those kids. Let's focus on that first.
Mr. Mayor, that's the reason why I'm asking you to separate.
So again, there's a
I'm
motion.
having a difficult time. I'm having a difficult time understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm
But,
sorry. I'm laughing. That's the problem. I apologize.
I was wondering if the mayor would you entertain a friendly amendment to your motion?
Can I hear it?
And could I suggest it at this time?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Could we direct the superintendent to collaborate with the staff to discuss the possibility of instruction happening remotely from each teacher's classroom with all the necessary precautions?
So then the motion would be remote with consideration for the high need students, complete the student, and I remember, you said family, I mean student, has to be student level survey, device, Wi-Fi, food, and this team approach to classroom review, but also a review of in-classroom asynchronous or synchronous learning.
Well, I don't think Pat is asking for a review of it. I think she's asking for a recommendation that teachers teach remotely from their classroom.
Yes,
Is that
I would
correct?
assume that, I would accept that as a friendly amendment.
And you're all gobbled, but I would hope that the entire staff could come back and teach remotely from their classroom.
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Discussion?
Thank
So,
you, Maria.
so there's a motion with amendments now. Is there a second?
I'll second it for discussion purposes.
Okay, so there's a second. Okay, so discussion?
I guess, I mean, I sort of generally support Pat's amendment, but I don't want to make that entirely mandatory, because I do feel like there were certainly teachers that we heard from that are in like special situations in terms of possibly being immunocompromised themselves or having family members who might not want to be in a building with other people at all. And so I'm willing to totally willing to accept that as the preferred standard, but not as mandatory, I guess, if you'll accept that, Pat.
Well, Jess, if you understand, these are classroom instruction. These will not have children in front of them. Most of the staff will not have children in front of them. Rather than teaching from home, they would be teaching from their classrooms, just to make that connection with the kids for real school. I think that's where my head is right now.
Yeah.
I understand the 20% of the children that have special needs and high-risk kids that need to come back that are in contact with teachers. But what I'm kind of alluding to are the opportunity for teachers to be in their classrooms, to teach remotely from their classrooms, and have the additional support the key. I think making sure that the curriculum is delivered and new teachers have support from the senior staff. And I think the teachers are in their buildings with all the necessary precautions, that school becomes real for our kids and the quality of lessons moves to a higher level.
I do have a question related to that. Is that even feasible? Because, I will imagine that since we're going remote and we would like to have a more robust way to teach the kids, even though, online is not the idea. It means that we're going to need more resources, better deliver, and better inform and train parents. So the money that it could have been saved from all the cleaning that was happening and now it's going to be transferred to doing these other trainings and reach out to the family, it will have to be shifted back, because we're going to have an increased number of teachers in the school district again. And then the second layer with that is, and I agree with Jess, there are many teachers that, from what we read, that they also have underlying chronic conditions, and that also they're taking care of people, family members that have underlying conditions. So I don't know if that will, by having the teachers coming in and not the students, we will still just fixing what we're trying to do halfway, because only half of the population that we're trying to help to be with limited exposure is now being potentially exposed.
I can say why I accepted the friendly amendment, and it's because I think that what Pat's trying to do is give an opportunity for teachers who want to give that experience to children. But I'm not sure she's trying to mandate it. But it's also in the motion. It's just to have them work together to figure it out if it's possible. That's the way the motion is, not to mandate it. But and Pat can correct me if I'm wrong. But in the motion, the way I read it, was for the superintendent to work with the staff to see if that's feasible. Did I get that wrong, Pat?
No, that's correct. That's correct. I'm not into forcing anybody into doing the remote learning from the classroom, but I just wonder if in some cases it would be easier to facilitate lessons from the school. That was my only intent. I did not intend to put any pressure on anybody as far as mandating. But I think if the superintendent could have these discussions, I'm just concerned about school being real for kids and kids having the closest thing to coming to school as possible. And I think, again, to reiterate what I've said before, seeing your teacher in a classroom, I think will add some substance to what's happening with the remote learning. And I thank you, Mayor, for accepting that amendment.
Yeah, and if I could, so on the one hand, I have no problem with asking the superintendent to work with the staff to see if it's feasible to do this in person. But I guess, for me, I assume that's part of what we're voting on when we're saying we want to go back with the remote and the considerations for special needs. And, the implementation of this now is up to the district working with staff, working with all of the resources, and for me, it just feels like, it's a given that the district will work with the union, with our teachers, to talk about the feasibility of the implementation of the plan that we're voting for tonight. So I don't have a problem with, the district or asking the district and the superintendent to work with the staff, but I guess for me, I assume that that's going to be what's going to happen anyway. And, I don't want to get in the business of maybe just telling the superintendent how to do the day-to-day implementation, because I think the role for the board is about policy. And so that's where I'm struggling with that is where, again, yes, it makes sense. Of course, we have to talk to the union. But it just feels like it's a line that for a policy board, it's kind of crossing a little bit into the implementation that just for me feels a little bit like crossing that line. Julio?
Right, I agree. I think, Mr. Mayor, that I'd like to see you go back and rephrase your, will we have to take a vote on the friendly amendment up or down before we can make a second motion? I think what Pat is saying, it's important, but again, going back to your part of your first motion with the team review, I think that would go better with that part of the motion than it does with the general motion that was made.
So I will rephrase with the added language, if that's okay for folks.
Please.
So the motion is to go to remote, to bring the district on starting the first year of school to remote learning with considerations for high needs learners as is directed by DESE. I want that to be part of the motion because this is what DESE is saying for us to do. Remote with consideration for high needs learners. Complete a student census, not a family census, a student census. Do they have a device, Wi-Fi, and food insecurity, some type of question around food insecurity. That a team be put together to review class space, where we're going to put the kids of high needs, that will include a member of the union, a member of the facilities team, a member of the administration. And that in those discussions with that team, the ability to have teachers teach from the classroom live or recorded be an option.
And my suggestion is to remove that last part of the motion and keep it separate. I don't think anyone is gonna vote against it. I just feel that the purpose of this meeting tonight is for us to vote on the plan, and we have incorporated other aspects of it, so it will keep the motion nice and clean. And I think you did a good job, Mr. Mayor, of the way you put it, that we're following Desi's suggestions in terms of how we go about this.
I'll remove it if you join us in the vote for the first two.
I will.
Yeah, so, and again, so as stated, and Joan, you're gonna have to review this tape to make sure the motion is written down accurately, but,
Again, part of the reason why this is in there, Mr. Chair, is because I want to give staff knowledge that we're not just going to throw them into every class in any classroom. That we're not going to throw these kids into any classroom. That we're going to all, as a group of people, have conversations about what classrooms are going to take place. I understand people are concerned about the space that they're going to do work in. I have those concerns. It's why we spend so much money fixing the HVAC at the South Lawrence School and at the Arlington School, and bringing heat and all this stuff to the schools because we know the conditions they're in. So I don't want them to be like, oh, I got to teach kids in the basement at the Oliver where there's not even a window, even though there's a high need student at the Oliver that needs that help. No, we're going to find, if we're only talking about 20%, and let's say if we get a high water mark of 18% of those kids show up or 15% of those kids show up, but it could be as low as half. At those places that they do it in, do remote learning, and with the consideration for the high need students in places where they're going to be the risk.
Maximally safe.
Yeah, the risk is lessened and maximally safe. So that's why I don't want to remove it.
fair enough. So the motion, again, just to try to restate it, is to approve the remote learning plan with consideration for special needs students as directed by DESE, and we'll get the specific language in there, and that there be a student level census done to identify if they have devices, Wi-Fi, and access to food, and that there be a review team put together to look at all classroom spaces, and those review teams would include multiple stakeholders, including teachers, facilities folks, union reps, and there were others that we'll make sure are in there. Again, to review the spaces where we're going to be putting students and teachers into. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And any further discussion?
So I'm not going to tack this on as yet another amendment to this already overburdened motion.
And folks, I'm sorry, I just feel like we're overcomplicating this right now.
Yeah.
It just feels like we need to take a vote on the motion on hand. Again, just respectfully, it just feels like we can continue to discuss, but I'd like to be able to vote on the motion that's on the floor, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Then I have another point that I
Okay,
would like
all
to
right.
make after.
Okay, so the motion is on the floor. I will do a roll call vote. Jess Andors.
Yes.
Noemi Custodia Laura.
Yes.
Pat Mariano.
Yes.
Mayor Rivera.
Yes.
Julia Silverio.
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So the motion carries.
Can
Jess.
yeah,
Okay.
right
I-
after
Sorry.
Jess.
So
I'll go to Jess and I'll come back to
the
her.
other thing I just want to say, because I don't want to lose sight of this, and Mr. Chair, I will follow your guidance about whether this will be overstepping, because having a board myself, I certainly don't want to micromanage our superintendent. But I do want to make sure that the point that we've all made around redirecting some of these resources that we might save with this fully remote start into increased engagement. I understand that that's an implementation question. I just want to state for the record that when we are meeting weekly and are hearing sort of report backs on progress around this, I am going to want to see evidence that we are doing that, because I think that that's going to be crucial to the success of the remote learning endeavor.
Great, duly noted. Thank you. Julio?
Yes, thank you. I just want to reiterate that although we took this vote and we're all in agreement that this is the best way to go forward, that this board still reserves the right to make changes to this plan based on the types of information that we received from the superintendent and the staff that as to how the plans are proceeding and how it's affecting our students and their families and the staff. So just the fact that I want that in the record, that we reserve that right to
Yep.
make that change.
Duly noted. Okay. I don't know how to pivot.
Interrupt?
Oh, yes, Pat, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to clear something up for the board and for anybody that might be listening. I had no intention to put any teachers in jeopardy or to harm any teachers with my suggestion that they teach remotely from the classroom. My sole intent for suggesting that, only if the buildings were safe, was so that kids would have a better connection with school. That was my sole intent for doing that. I would never, in any way, shape, or form, nor would anyone in the board, want to see teachers or students put in a situation where they could be harmed or contract this virus or bring it home to their family or family members, etc. I think it's important that I say that. I just, like I say, my sole intent was for the kids and trying to get that real connection with school for them. They've been away from school too long, and that's basically what I want to say. And I want to apologize if I've offended anybody.
Pat, I don't think you have to apologize, but I appreciate it. Thank you for that. The next item is, and this is going to be a hard pivot, donation of paper.
Oh, Jesus.
What?
I thought that was funny too. Okay. Yeah, so we have a donation of paper, and I don't know what else to say, but we can always use paper in our schools, and we've been lucky enough to been donated paper. There's not much.
Questions
more to
from
say
board
there.
members? If not, I'm happy to entertain a motion. So there's a motion to accept the donation of papers. Is there a second?
Sure, I'll second that.
Okay, for the record, Jess Andor seconded that. All right. And I'll do a roll call vote. So Jess,
Yes.
Noemi,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Mayor Rivera,
Yes.
Julio,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So that passes. We do have an executive session, and that agenda was also provided. So just to be clear, we're going into executive session for one of the allowable reasons, which is to look at a contract specifically. So it's, again, not to continue any conversation around the reopening of schools or anything like that, but solely for consideration of that contract. So when we go into executive session, I'll ask everyone to leave with the exception of staff that will be presenting. We will pause the Facebook Live stream for this portion. So is there a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
So moved. Second.
Great. All those, so let me roll call. Jess, Noemi,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
Mayor Rivera,
Yes.
Julio?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And just to confirm that for members who are participating remotely, so Noemi and Pat, a yes vote signifies that, you're also providing attestation that no one can hear where you're at physically, any of the content of the executive session. So once we clear the room here, then we'll be in executive session. We're now back in open session, and just to confirm, we took and unanimously passed the matter before us related to the contract issue. So at this point, I will entertain a motion to, well, before I do that, is there anything else? Sorry, any other business or anything else board members want to say? Or the superintendent?
Thank you so much. I just want to add my gratitude to you all for your continuous support, thoughtful questions, and feedback that you give us. I want to thank the teachers and all the stakeholder groups that we met with and gave their input, had important questions, excellent feedback, and more importantly, I want to appreciate my leadership team that has worked enormous amount of hours to draft this, to gather input, to think through. I'm deeply grateful for all the time that you have spent. I'm looking forward to the implementation of the remote model with our principals, school-based staff, our union leaders, with our families and students, and of course, our partners.
Great, thank you. And I too just want to reiterate, thank you, Superintendent, to you and your team. When I said earlier in my comments around this is the hardest decision I've made in my career, I know for you all, it's probably similar. And then you have the, again, ongoing responsibility of just the day-to-day planning for implementation. So I just thank you for everything you all have done and everything you're going to continue to do. I'll say to you again, just publicly, that anything the board can do to support you all in this work, I mean, this is, I can literally say there's nothing more important right now, so please don't hesitate to let us know. And, it already feels like years ago, but last week we were figuring out the technology for this new thing, and this week, this is what happens with operations. When you do your job, no one really notices because it's just so smooth. So, but I do notice. I just want to say thank you all for, just everything you did from one week to the next to make this just super smooth, and just really appreciate it. Okay. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Jess?
Yes.
Noemi?
Yes.
Pat?
Yes.
Mayor Rivera? Julio?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, so we're now adjourned. Thank you.